Welcome to The Current Situation, your Palmetto State political pulse. I'm your host, Joshua Gale, alongside South Carolina State House Representative Jordan Pace. Every week, our goal is to help you navigate the complex world of politics through a biblically conservative perspective. This week, we're going to unpack something that's pretty confusing, as South Carolina's new income tax bill is being sold as a historic tax relief. But is it really a tax cut or a tax code reshuffle with a much better slogan than substance? So Jordan is going to unpack that for us, and we're going to talk about some different bills that are in the State House. And before we begin, we'll take a minute to hear from this week's sponsor. Hi, I'm Joshua Gale, founder and designer at Val & Vine Jewelry. Here at Val & Vine, we understand marriage the way God designed it, a covenant rooted in unity and purpose. We also believe that jewelry is part of his design. We see it throughout creation, and we see it mentioned in the beginning of the Bible, beginning in Genesis. Gold is representing purity, diamonds representing radiance, and rings signifying commitment and covenant. At Val & Vine, our work blends this reverence with modern fashion and refined design. Every piece of jewelry is crafted with intention, guided by education, and delivered with confidence and kindness. At Val & Vine, every experience begins with a simple phone call. Whether you're just needing fashion and style guidance, or you're wanting to create something custom and uniquely yours. Whether you're envisioning a custom engagement ring, style guidance, or a meaningful gift, our goal at Val & Vine is to make your journey personal, clear, and enjoyable. So take your time, explore our collection, and when you're ready, schedule a commitment-free call with one of our team members. There's nothing we can't design together. All right, Jordan, how's it going this week?
Well, I'm recovering from budget week and these tax bills. That was all last week. We're on furlough this week, so I have a little time to catch up.
There we go. Awesome. So this week we're going to unpack something that's kind of, been spun a lot, and it's been spun many different ways. And so we're going to unpack that, but to help, what we've put together a graphic here. So if you're watching, on YouTube or anything on social media, you'll be able to see this graphic. If you're listening along through one of our streaming platforms, whether it's Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, any of those, head over to our social media where I'll put the graphic link in the show notes so that you can take a look at it as well, and it might help understand what exactly we're unpacking here. So Jordan, go ahead and introduce what we're discussing and why it's so important that we discuss it.
Yeah, there are two bills that were passed after the budget. So we did the budget first, $15.4 billion. If we're comparing apples to apples, like this version of the budget compared to last year's version of the budget at this time, it's about $1 billion more than last year. It's a lot. It's where we should be over the last 10 years, according to like population plus inflation, we should be at 13.25 billion instead of 15.4. Oh. So not much was cut. We tried to cut $400 or $500 million from it, and didn't have the votes, but we will get there. As far as these two bills,
$1 billion. I just can't skip over that for just a minute. So we're up last year from 1,000 millions in budget from last year, and there's not even 1,000 people in the House and the Senate that could come up with $1 million each. But somehow we've come up with $1 billion to increase on the taxpayers who are all thousandaires, which actually is not even a word in the dictionary because nobody wants to be one. One, because we're paying so much in taxes, and we find it hard to even support our families, yet alone grow any wealth. So, but somehow we're fitting the bill and paying for $1 billion increase over last year.
Yeah, and so this kind of leads into these tax bills. I had a conversation about a year and a half ago with somebody very high up in House leadership. They expressed to me that basically this is a real shame, according to them, that 44% of the state doesn't pay any income tax. To which I responded, no, I think it's a real shame that 56% of the state does pay an income tax. Right. And that I think helps frame what we're about to talk about. There's some people in the House whose perspective, I think, a lot of times stems from them never being poor. Like they were raised very, very wealthy. They've maintained very, very wealthy, and they have multiple houses on the beach and the mountains and everywhere else. They just don't understand what it's like to grow up in a trailer. and just barely get by. Their perspective is everybody needs to pay something, versus another group of us, principal conservative Republicans in the House, say the income tax is both immoral and impractical, particularly at the rates that it's at now. So what we got was this bill 4216. We talked about it before in the past. About a year ago, it passed the House. The original version of this bill raised taxes on 70% of the population. The bill that we got back from the Senate wound up raising it on 22.6% of the population, while 42% would see a decrease. Most of those are, let's say, the majority of that 22.6 would see an increase. It would be fairly substantial, like more than $50 to $100 a year. Those who would see the decrease, most of those would see a decrease of like somewhere between $5 and $50 a year is their decrease, unless they're on like the very, very high end of the income spectrum. So if you're making $500,000 a year or more and you're seeing a decrease, you're seeing a pretty significant decrease. And then 34.5% see no change. So there's that bill. And then separate from that, there was 3368. This is what's called conformity. Every year prior to this year, the state tax code conforms to the federal tax code. So when it comes to the standard deduction and things like that, they go to match it. Now, this year's a really big deal on why we needed to do that for 2025, because the one big beautiful bill changes to no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, a bigger standard deduction, a senior, I don't know if it was a deduction or credit. All of those played into this. And this is why people were getting error messages or warning messages when they filed their state tax returns so far this year. We haven't done the conformity yet. So the House passed it. That's gone over to the Senate for them to do, hopefully very quickly. However, should 4216 become law, which is likely, the governor just needs to sign it or let it sit for 7 days and it becomes law, we will no longer conform to federal tax code. So no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. 2025 would be so last year, what people are filing now would be the only time that would be effective. Going forward, taxes, tips, and overtime would be taxed. And essentially all the deductions, so the standard deduction, child tax credits, mortgage tax credits, all these things that have decreased the amount of income that has been taxed in the past, those go away entirely. So the rate does go down. Right now we're about 6% taxation rate. The rate goes down to 5.19 for those making over 30,000 and 1.99 for under 30,000. Like lowering the rate is good, but it makes up for it more so by taxing more of your income. And that's where the problem's at. And that's why a lot of people, particularly in the 120,000 to 300,000 range, like that group of folks, the 120 to 300,000
per household
in family income, per household. If a teacher and a fireman or a policeman or something along those lines. These are the working families. That's who's going to bear the brunt of that tax increase. Somewhere around 30+% of that range are going to see a tax hike versus those at the lower range. 98.6, according to RFA, of those who don't pay taxes now still will not pay taxes under this new plan. It's just going to increase taxes on a lot of the working class, which is why 49 of us voted against it.
And 40, not just 49, but I mean, you guys have been, and the Freedom Caucus have been beating a dead horse on this for a while. That I think why you, not even just like unpopular with House leadership or unpopular with different folks in Columbia, many folks, is not just for any reason. It's also mocked. I watch many videos and watch adults mock other adults because of the fact that your goal is to, guys, how do we figure out how to cut spending rather than put more burden on the taxpayer? And that is a dead horse that you've beat for since you've been in the House and everybody else in the Freedom Caucus. And that's what I guess makes you unpopular, because you want to figure out how to cut spending rather than spend other people. Listen, I'd love a job that my mom had, one of the greatest jobs in the world. She was so incredible at it. She was an interior designer. Her job was to spend other people's money to make their house look beautiful. And she was so great at it because she could help people communicate how their vision. They couldn't communicate their vision. She could. And then she could bring it all to life. So she earned that. She got to spend other people's money. It's great. It must be nice. And so, when somebody goes on my behalf to Columbia to, raise taxes, and it's when it's affecting anybody, it's an issue. So I see, another part of this graphic, Peaky promised future goals, but these are extremely conditional, correct?
Yeah. Yes. So the proponents of the bill, one of the, I would argue, deceptive ways they've tried to sell it is by claiming that this puts us on a path to zero income tax. The very first bill I ever filed, and the very first bill I file every year or every session, every 2 years, is to eliminate the income tax entirely. That is one of my goals. However, the path that they would put us on to do that would take somewhere between 25 and 30 years to accomplish under the way this bill's set up. So the bill requires a 5% increase in revenue for the state and a minimum of $500 million in the reserve fund in order to decrease the tax rate by 0.2%. So to put that in perspective, 7 or so, maybe 8 of the last 10 years have met that mark. So not even every year for the last 10 years have met that mark of revenue growth. And so by that calculation, if we're going by that, let's say 7 out of the last 10 years, it's going to take us about 28 years to get to zero. But here's the rub. There's this thing called the Laffer curve, where when you decrease rates, you get more revenue to a certain point. And once you kind of get over that top point where we're bringing in the maximum amount of revenue, and if you keep lowering the rate, you actually start bringing in less revenue. So the way this is set up, we will never really ever go to zero functionally, because there will come a point in that probably around that 1.99 range where the revenue will not be enough to trigger the decrease. And so that's the argument I made on the floor is, while it does put us on a path,
there's a lot to assume that holds to even
there's
get us
a lot
there.
of it, right? And eventually you're going to hit a wall. So I use the Wile E. Coyote analogy. Wile E. Coyote paints the tunnel on the wall for the roadrunner to try to run into. There is a path, and it looks like it's going somewhere, but in fact, it hits a wall, pretty precipitously once you get over that hill, and nobody really knows where that. I'm just guessing when I say 1.99, it's somewhere between 1 and 2.99, and I don't know where that is.
And the reality is they don't either.
And there was another claim, like it says down there on that graphic. There's some outside groups were making claims like this is going to get us all to 1.99 in 5 years. That would require somewhere close to 1,000% increase in revenue every year for 5 years to get us to that point. And that is not going to happen outside of rapid superinflation on the scale of Venezuela 10 years ago, in which case we're breaking into the zoo to eat the zoo animals because we've become so poor due to hyperinflation.
Right. So what we're seeing here is a classic political spin. It's campaign style talking points being sold as much simpler than it is, when in reality it's not simple at all. But that is where we're at, again, with politics, is people they're at capacity and they're being sold something and they're being told, just trust us. Yeah. We're here, working late to make this happen for you. When really, who wins, Jordan? Somebody always wins. Who wins from this budget going through the way they want it to?
Well, who wins from the budget is certainly not the taxpayer for the most part. Certainly, who wins from this tax bill? I mean, if you're on the very, very high end of the income, it's going to help. It's going to help you a lot, and that's great. I'm not opposed to tax cuts for the wealthy, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of everyone else. And that is the left. The Democrats often try to perpetuate this Republican or conservative stereotype that we're only out for the super rich, the Scrooge McDucks, the Monopoly man, whatever stereotype that's out there of that. And I don't think it's a good idea to help them perpetuate that stereotype with a bill like this. I put up, I think, 6 amendments on the floor to try to negate this imbalance to some degree. Somewhere around 23 votes on those, and this is very telling, is why I bring this up. All 23 of those votes were Republicans. The Democrats had an opportunity to vote with us to fix this, and they chose not to. I've seen several of the Democrats who voted against the bill, and that's good, to get out there and make this claim, basically that the Republicans are out to get the poor people and things like that. And we've not done ourselves any favors by passing the bill, but they had an opportunity 6 times to fix this, and they didn't vote with us once. Those of us, the Freedom Caucus and other principal conservatives in the House who recognize these problems, the Democrats didn't vote with us once. So I guess to tie this into like the biblical perspective on it, one, this is not equal weights and measures. Both in Proverbs, I believe in Ecclesiastes, and in Psalms, it says that God detests markets without equal weights and measures, and rulers that don't enforce fair standards amongst folks, to treat one the same as the other. That does not apply here. And then the other side of this is the deceptiveness, and this applies to the Republican establishment and the Democrats who are trying to deceive the voters with both of their spins and talking points.
So, I'm looking here locally, talking about what benefits the rich and things like that. We've got, Jordan, I feel like it's every week I'm sending you something about something here in North Charleston where somebody else is being indicted for fraud, or,
Yeah.
We're still going back to fraud and COVID spending. And, there's a gentleman, Kevin Hollenshed, who, has resigned from the school board because he's now facing up to 30 years in federal prison for bribery. Taking money and for his position to promise your taxpayer dollars to the highest bidder, to force somebody through a bid process because they're willing to pay into his pockets. And so there's multiple counts, multiple different things being done there. It's looking out for the wealthy again from the Democratic side, when you have somebody like, say, Carlotta Bailey, a friend of mine, who's on the school board. They're extremely upset that this black woman cannot be politicized and used as a tool for gain. And she gets constantly mocked for her faith, number one, which I think she's incredible. Somebody's cursing at her on the microphone the other night, and she said, "Listen, I'm anointed and chosen by God. I'm a daughter of God, and the Bible is very clear that if you should repent for coming after His children and his. I just want to let you know you should repent, and unless you would, but if you don't have fear of God, we'll see." But she's so kind. Yeah,
there's such a lack within our state government of a fear of God, of a fear of judgment, frankly, judgment from the voters, but judgment from on high, that used to exist, and we've lost it somewhere in the last 50 years. Even if you don't get caught by the taxpayers, by your voters, or by law enforcement, there used to be some sense with a lot of these people of like, God is watching the way that I'm governing. Right. I mean, Psalm 2 is pretty explicit about, kiss the Son. And talking to magistrates, judges, and rulers, kiss the Son lest he be angry. Like, why do the nations rage in vain? There's a reckoning to be had for those that have been put in these positions of authority, whether it's judges or elected officials, or mayors, city council, state house, governor, whatever.
Yeah,
it is roundly ignored for the most part.
Well, I think we're in a season of exposing, and I really hope that people would repent, whether the exposing happens to them or not, to repent before that even happens. But again, it makes me sick. I watch some of the footage from the floor, and I watch grown men mock other people and say, "Hey, me and my boys over here, we think you guys are nuts and think you're stupid. We're going to mock you and try to make you feel stupid and make you question things." And but it's disturbing when we're elected by the people for the people, but it never seems it's for the people. There's something else. And why do we constantly have to be filled with you don't have someone representing me or this state does not have our best interest in mind, because there is the dollar, which they may have when they first ran, but money does not corrupt people. Money exposes who they really are. And some of these people have never had this moment of repentance or fear of God. And so when you don't have the fear of God, that money that's coming towards you looks very appealing.
Or money or power. Let me give you two stories very quickly about exactly that. I had two separate conversations with two different members of Ways and Means, the budget committee, who wrote these two bills. So 3368 is a good bill. It's great. I hope the Senate passes it. But 4216 specific, this tax shift bill. The conversation I had a year ago was with a guy who had just recently put on Ways and Means, and he'd been in the House for a while, and calls himself, he's a believer, he goes to church, everything like that. And when I brought this up, that at the time, 26%, before the Senate lowered the rate a little bit, 26% of the state was going to tax increase. And he put out that false claim, well, it's just the people that don't pay taxes. And I showed him, no, here's from RFA, that's not true. He goes, well, yeah, you're right, we know, but people aren't going to notice because they're going to keep more of their money in every month in their paycheck because withholdings will change. So they'll see more money in their paycheck. They just won't get a return when they file their taxes in 2027. I said, but their taxes are going to still go up. Yeah, but they won't notice. So just don't talk about it. Like, deceive them was his strategy. And then a year later, I talked to somebody else in Ways and Means, somebody who'd been there for a long time, and I brought this up on the phone with them, and they said, well, yeah. I said, well, basically the question I said was, what do I tell the people in my district who predominantly in that 120,000 to 300,000 range family income? 30 to 40% of them will see hundreds of dollars a year in increase in taxes. And he said, well, just tell them they'll see more in their paycheck every month. He brought it the same thing. It was a coordinated talking point from these folks that their strategy is, and we see it still today, they're maintaining, to actively deceive the taxpayers, to tell them you'll see more in your paycheck. But they're not telling them you might not only not get a return that you're counting on to fix your washing machine or fix your car or pay off your Christmas debt, you might even get a bill. Like you might owe money when you file your taxes for the first time ever, despite having 2 or 3 kids, despite doing everything you're supposed to do. Those people in 2027 are going to be profoundly angry, and frankly, they should be. So not only because their taxes have gone up, but because their politicians who wrote the tax increase, their strategy was to deceive them and lie to them about the whole thing.
Yeah. And I see it, and most people, it's not that people aren't smart enough to see through deception. It's that they trust these people. These people are incredible salesmen and women who have gotten together to put some branding, some, like you said, some PR into one statement that is, hey, trust us. You may see more in your paycheck. Trust us. And if they hear something enough times from enough people, maybe it is true, but it's coordinated and it's right along the lines of propaganda as well to pass something that benefits somebody else. So we're right for not being able to trust those in leadership. They've given us 0 reasons to trust, and one of those reasons being a $1 billion increase in our state without looking for a million ways, not 100 or 1,000 million, but just a million ways to cut taxes or cut spending here in the state. I love cutting spending, Jordan. I could go to any company here in South Carolina and show them about a dozen ways to cut spending immediately without bottlenecking anything, without removing somebody's job or whatever it may be, just because I've lived enough life to see what things really cost. So on the manufacturing side or anything like that, and services. So, and it may be just a gift as well to be able to see how to operate without spending extra. So maybe we need to submit our bill through ChatGPT and see what Chat thinks about wasteful spending. An unbiased opinion on that, but we don't know. It might be biased. So, well, anyways, it's great to break this down. What can we do? Obviously, the conversation has to be on cutting spending, but I know that once a bill, passes the House, it has to go through the Senate. What are we looking at in the days ahead as far as these bills? And then what can we as voters do?
So 4216 has already come through the Senate, and this was its return trip to the House. So it is likely to be signed by the governor in the next couple of days if he hasn't signed it already before this, by the time this podcast gets out. So the way to handle that is, I'm going to drop 5 or 6 bills as soon as tax shift becomes law to fix it, and we'll try to have a discussion now, like before it affects people unduly. Try to fix it before then. So I'll share those bill numbers once they get filed to talk to your representative about it.
I would call my representative and say, I want Bill H.
Whatever the number is.
Okay.
Right. We want this passed to fix this tax.
Are you going to vote for it, in favor of it, to send it to the Senate? Okay. And so what if the response is no?
Well, it is election season, and people are filing through basically the end of the month. So I think most representatives are going to be most acutely aware and ready to answer questions and have conversations with people between now and the end of the month is the most acutely aware they're going to be. So I'd say take advantage of it. The other part of this is you got, like you said, in order to cut taxes for everyone and not just some people, we have to cut spending, and we have to cut spending by at least several $100 million this year for this to work. And we have the House will have another opportunity to do that at the end of April. So the Senate get the budget, and they'll do whatever they're going to do to the budget over there. Usually it goes up. They'll send it back to us, probably with earmarks on it. And the House will probably try to put earmarks on there. And frankly, that'll be our opportunity to go back and try to cut some more that we didn't get the votes for last week. And then again, handle the earmark situation. Depending on rumor is, have as many as $1 billion worth of earmarks in these little special pet projects from legislators. If that's the case, then that's really where we'll be aiming those scissors at, and where we'll have another opportunity to fix this problem that 4216 has created.
Okay. Well, I have two other statements here. One question, Melissa and I were having our 5th child this year. And so to try to, it's not manipulative because I'm being funny about it, but to influence the name of my next son, throw out some terrible names like Bart. If your name's Bart, I'm sorry. All I can think of is Bart Simpson. I'll throw out some names like that. And then when I throw out a name that I really like, it's like, oh, that sounds really nice. What sounds really nice also in comparison to what I've been throwing out. Are a lot of the earmarks in the budget like to shift your focus away from really what they're wanting to pass through the bill or the budget and make you focus on cutting out the fluff they threw in?
Yeah. So in the past, they've tried to throw out, a lot of folks have done this already on the budget this year. They'll say like this X amount toward law enforcement and teachers, and like they'll talk about the handful of good things that are in the budget. Like this budget, to their credit, had a lot more spending on transportation. So roads and bridges got hundreds of millions more dollars in this year's budget than last year's. Ironically, it's the things that the Freedom Caucus were fighting to get last year. We were trying to get them to move money into these things. They're finally doing it. So they'll lead with that. With earmarks, they'll lead with like, oh, well, this $300,000 is for a fire truck in, rural, whatever, Glendale County,
right,
for instance. They'll lead with those things, but they're not talking about, there's $400,000 for a town library for a town of 400 people, or $900,000 for a podcast that never gets produced. They certainly don't want to talk about, like in the budget we found last year, and they asked for more money in an email last week. There was a group from the arts that they got a grant from the Arts Commission to produce a podcast about 19th century lesbian actresses.
I saw that.
Romeo and her sister.
Yeah.
So they're not going to talk about those things. Well, we try to draw out, look at all this junk.
Right. Well,
So,
and getting mocked in the
that-
process. I've seen smear campaigns against the Freedom Caucus saying, well, they voted against something good, or, they voted against more money for teachers or firefighters or law enforcement or whatever.
Yeah.
What they're really saying is you voted against a budget that you didn't agree with because it had so much money for stupid things that the taxpayers have to pay for. But really, instead of saying that they're voting against those stupid things, they're saying altogether you voted against the good things that were in the budget.
The gross analogy that I use for this is a brownie. Like if somebody hands you a big, delicious looking chocolate brownie and says, "Hey, here's a lovely chocolate brownie for you to eat if you want it." By the way, about 4% of that brownie is made of dog poop. It's in there. This is gross, but there's about 4% of the brownie is dog waste. Or would you eat that brownie? Well, no, I'm not going to eat that brownie, even though it's 96%, chocolate brownie goodness. If it's 4% dog feces, I'm not eating that brownie. And to carry this analogy forward, if that person who handed you the brownie turned around to everyone and said, "This guy's an idiot. He won't take my free brownie that I'm giving him. Look how delicious this brownie looks. It is 96% brownie, and he won't eat it. What a fool."
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of those talking points about the budget.
All right. So we'll put this graphic in the show notes and put it on social media. I'll also write, once you introduce these bills that are counter to this budget, I'll start writing in our social media the exact verbiage of an email or phone call script that you can submit to your state representatives to show them how you feel, that you're standing with a large group of people that are standing up and speaking for their future of their bank accounts, their savings, their children, all those things. And so that we can take a stand together against this corruption, this careless spending by people who don't understand the real concept of a dollar. So yeah, any last words?
I'll leave everybody with some optimism, some positivity.
Yeah.
We had 18 no votes on this first round of the budget. That is the most we've ever had on the first go. I think last year it was 15. The year before that it was 13. we are making progress on this subject. People are waking up outside the chamber, obviously, but even within the chamber, a lot of our amendments wound up with like 30 to 33, 35 votes in our favor. So there are members that are waking up and want a change. They just need a little bit more encouragement, to really put the hammer down and be the change. So we are making progress. We'll see what comes back from the Senate. I just want to leave that. I don't want people to black pill on this, to be pessimistic. We're winning the fight in the long run.
That's great. Well, you mentioned it is election season, so that is a way to kind of influence the people. Get involved in a political race, support people, conservatives. You heard it when Phoenicia Miracle was on here. We'd love to buy something like formula, but when it comes to giving money, we'll keep that close to us. But get involved any way you can in these political races and find out who these people are. Last thing, Jordan, I'm dying to know. I saw you post something as all the different people were filing their official filing for governor. Would you like to speak into that at all?
Yeah, I'm supporting Ralph Norman. I have from the start since he announced. I've known Congressman Norman for a good while. We share a similar vision for the state, which is cutting spending on this wasteful stuff, getting actual tax relief to everybody, transparency, and the works. I mean, the guy, I think, would be the most transformational governor we've ever had.
Is he a man of faith?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I hear a lot from his children. I subscribe to a lot of the candidates' emails. I hear a lot from his children of how God-centric and family-centric that he is. And usually you can tell that people, when they value family so much, that really they have an understanding of how long they get to be here. And he's sharp. I love to hear him speak. He's enthusiastic and has a great head on his shoulders. He's not full of pride, and he probably seems pretty easy to have a conversation with. So that's great to hear. I know that my phone, as we get closer to election primaries, my phone usually blows up with, Josh, who am I voting for? What's on the ballot?
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Well, it's great to hear all of this. And Jordan, thank you for joining this week. And we look forward to our next conversation on what's on the other side of these bills and the budget and the rest of what's happening in South Carolina this year.